Hey there, welcome to the Jarrett Hill Show. I am, you might have guessed, Jarrett Hill. We have such a great show for you today. I have two conversations that are really in line with so many of the things that we've been talking about all season long. I can tell you one of the first interview with Dr. Dorothy A. Brown, we were looking to just do like a 20-minute conversation with her about how she sees taxes as being racist and like actually written in a way that is racist. And I was really taken aback by seeing a clip of her on social media, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But we started talking to her, and she has just so much really interesting perspective, and the way that she kind of puts these things in intersections and the ways that it was actually really necessary for her to do her work. So she talks about taxes and marriage and how your taxes can be uniquely harmful to you if you are married. And even more so if you are Black and married, right? She also was going to be talking about, and you guys, I didn't know that she was going to do this, but we ended up talking about why there are no good billionaires. And she comes at that from a really interesting perspective. So you're just going to have to deal. And it's great. Danielle might even pop in with like very excited arms at some point. I can't promise that, but it's probably going to happen. And then brace thyself. She says Donald Trump may get us reparations. Hold on. Sit back. Wait. Hey, look at me. Look at me. Look at me. Everything's okay. It could happen. And I actually think she's absolutely right. We will get into that part of the conversation as well. So you definitely want to get into this conversation with Dr. Dorothy A. Brown. Then we are going to be talking to Derrick Palmer. You may have heard of Derrick Palmer and Christian Smalls. Christian Smalls recently was arrested for protesting at the Met Gala. Christian and Derrick are both heads of the Amazon labor union that has really come into a lot of conversation. And Derrick joins us to talk about organizing that labor union and the new book that he has written to kind of discuss that experience. And I gotta say this, I think that Amazon may have made it difficult for him to finish this interview. You'll see what we mean by that in the interview. But he also is talking to us about the ways in which the work that they did at Amazon is something that you could replicate wherever you are. We talked with Dr. Dorothy Brown about labor and the ways that labor shows up problematically from a tax perspective. We're talking about how labor shows up from unionization in this conversation with Derrick Palmer, and I think you're going to really, really appreciate that. But first, get into our conversation with Dr. Dorothy A. Brown. So I'm very, very grateful for you being here. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yes. So first things first, I'm asking all of our guests these days, like in the midst of everything that's going on in the world and the ways that we're seeing things change and all the concerns that might bring up, especially for someone who is like yourself, how are you taking care of yourself in this time?
So, right now, I am in my summer house in Massachusetts where it's 70 degrees outside and life is good. That's what I'm taking
Okay,
care of myself. Leaving DC way behind me.
I hear you. Taking some time away is
Yes.
definitely helpful, I'm sure. I when we booked you to talk about this, we were initially trying to have you on our
For
second
tax day,
episode
right?
for tax day. Exactly,
Yes.
yes. And I had just saw the video of you talking to Aaron Haynes about taxes, and I was like, oh my gosh, our team, we have been like, who is the person to talk to about how we see this? And I was so excited to have you. And things have gotten more interesting in the weeks since we
Yes.
were able to actually finally get you here. And I guess from like a newsworthiness standpoint or like things that are happening in the world right now, I'm really curious how you're thinking about what we're seeing right now with President Trump and his lawsuit with the IRS and the ways that we might be seeing that money going in a very reparative kind of way to some January Sixers. I just want to know what's top of mind for you with this case.
So, when I first heard about the fund, I thought, oh, so he's paying reparations to insurrectionists. And we're just going to be okay with that. And actually, I don't think we are going to be okay with that. I believe two police officers who were there on January 6th have filed a lawsuit to stop the fund from going forward. So we'll see how that plays out. But the idea, well, first of all, it's not a settlement. So the case was dismissed. This is not a settlement. This is the Trump administration trying to set up a fund without congressional approval for it. So I'm going to start there. And then I'm going to say, what he wants to do, or he says it's for the weaponization of government. So I thought, so I guess all the Black earned income tax credit claimants who were audited at 3 to 5 times their non-Black EITC claimant rate should be able to file a complaint and get money for that. I doubt it, but you want to talk about a weaponization of government, right?
I love how your brain works. This is amazing. Please carry on.
Right, so that's what I thought. So if you were Black, Stanford researchers showed this. If you were Black and you filed for the earned income tax credit, you were 3 to 5 times more likely to be audited than if you were not Black. And the IRS looked at the study and replicated it and said, actually, that's right, and we need to fix that. But for the years at issue, the people who were unfairly audited or targeted because they were Black, because of how the algorithm played out, should be able to file petitions to get money themselves, not people who engaged in insurrection.
I think this is interesting because you kind of got me to one of the things that you were discussing that I thought was so interesting. You talked about the ways in which the tax code is racist, essentially, right? And the ways that it is negatively impacting Black folks. And the ways that the tax code is seen as race neutral because it's numbers and it's policy. Right. But you really looked at this from a way that I just thought was so interesting. I should note you have 2 books, right? Obviously, the reparations piece that we're talking about touches on the book that you just released called Getting to Reparations, How Building a Different America Requires a Reckoning with Our Past, which even the title of that, the word reckoning, I'm like, oh, wait, we didn't reckon a couple of years ago? I thought this was over, right?
Yeah, right.
But then you also have a book that preceded this book that I've heard you say that the book that you wrote before this, really at the end of it, it brought the question for the next book. Your previous book is called The Wealth of Whiteness, How the Tax System Impoverishes Black Americans and How We Can Fix It. And that is something that we're really, really focused on here. That last piece is like the and how we can fix it piece. Because we see this show in our conversations as looking at this moment that we're in and talking about surviving it, but then also thinking about what we can do in the future to be able to rebuild once this does what it's doing, right? Whatever topsy-turvy thing that we're doing. And I really love the way that you talked about your parents and being able and doing their taxes and seeing how something about this doesn't make sense. And then eventually starting this work and finding like, oh, this is why this doesn't work. And so I was really curious about like, what was the conversation that changed with your parents after you talked to them about this, or did you get the opportunity to?
So, my mother proofread The Whiteness of Wealth. So as she's reading the chapter, well, she was interviewed for the book, but when she was reading the chapter, she's like, my mother, who's going to be 95 next month, is Christian, religious, conservative, never heard her use the R word in her life. When she read The Whiteness of Wealth, when she proofed it, she goes, James and I deserve reparations. She was outraged when she saw how much in additional taxes she actually paid. And I'm like looking at the phone. Oh, my mother said that the reparations word. And that's when, I realized it struck a chord with her. It struck a chord with a lot of the readers. It struck a chord with every Black journalist that interviewed me around The Whiteness of Wealth. So I realized that this was something that was unfair. We were, people are sold the bill of goods. You get married, you get all these tax breaks, life is good. When actually the way Black Americans do marriage, life is not good. In fact, they pay excess taxes than if they had stayed single and just lived in the same household.
I thought that was so interesting. And so it made me go down this rabbit hole of like, okay, wait, because and then wait, but then, and so like I was doing that kind of thing. And in the piece where in the clip where you're talking to Aaron Haynes, She mentions that you wrote a piece about the Obama's taxes and how
Yes.
interesting that kind of dynamic was. And I appreciated in the framing, you're like, why do we ask this question? And you're like, well, when we can fix things for Black folks, we can fix things for most folks or almost everyone. Um, but I was looking in the piece about your parents, you used the term marriage penalty at the end. And it was something that like I'm not married and I'm like, oh, I don't know what the marriage penalty is. So I did a quick Google. And I want you to tell me if you agree with this language that comes from the Tax Policy Center. They say marriage penalties are more common when spouses have similar incomes, and bonuses are more probable when spouses have disparate incomes. So then I paused and I was like, wait, there's a bonus and there's a penalty and
Yes.
there's a bonus. And I was like, oh, see, now this sounds like some bullshit. See,
Yes.
it, it hit me in a particular kind of way. I'll put it that way. So
Yes.
then it continues and says, married couples with children are more likely to incur marriage penalties than couples without children because one or both spouses could use the head of household filing status if they were able to file as unmarried. It finally says, under certain circumstances, tax provisions that phase in or out with income may produce marriage bonuses or penalties. And I immediately thought to myself, like, well, the patriarchy is built right in, right? We can see that
Yep.
very clearly because of the way that these things are written, expecting men to make more money than women, right?
Yep.
And how that stacks. But then I was thinking the Black piece of this comes into the conversation when I think about 60% of Black women are either primary breadwinners or egalitarian in their marriage, right?
Hmm.
And I was like, that already hurts Black women in the Black families in this scenario. Talk to me about how this rabbit hole kind of illuminated different things for you in tax code that really said to you, like, this is not as equal as we say it is. Because I'm sure you had light bulb moments that really did that for you.
So it started with me reading an article that asked the question, how do you know there isn't a race and tax issue if you don't look? I went into tax law to get away from race. I thought it had absolutely nothing to do with race. That's the way I wanted it. I grew up in the South Bronx. I dealt with racism regularly. I didn't want to deal with racism in the type of law that I practiced. So I picked tax law because I thought the only color that mattered was green. And
Mm.
as I write in the book, I have never been more wrong about anything in my life. So I'm doing my parents' tax returns. I'm an investment banker on Wall Street. I'm by myself making what they are making combined. And my tax bill is slightly higher than theirs, but it should be significantly higher than theirs. And I could never figure out why. I always came away thinking my parents are paying too much. My parents are paying too much. The return was simple. There wasn't anything I was doing wrong. That's just the way the tax laws were written. But because I had a full time job, I really didn't have time to think about it. So fast forward, I become a law professor and I read this article that says, how do you know there isn't a race and tax problem if you don't look? And I said, I never thought about race and tax. Well, let me look. That's when I found out the IRS and Treasury do not publish statistics by race. Well, how was I ever going to find out if the government doesn't publish those statistics? And I want to pause here for a moment because the government publishes a lot of statistics by race. They publish home ownership, they publish labor, they publish bicycles by race, they publish all this data by race, but not tax return data by race. So at that point, I didn't realize how significant that was, but I just went, well, how am I ever going to figure this out? And then I reverse engineered it. I went to the research on race and I decided to figure out how the tax law would apply to the research on race, and then I could tell the story. So
Mm.
I'm figuring this out, but I came across a U.S. Commission on Civil Rights study on the economic status of Black women. Because at this point, I became a detective and I was just devouring all kinds of race data I could. Well, this study said 40 to 41% of married Black wives contribute 41% to household income. Married white wives contribute 29%. And I went, oh my God, that's it. Now, anybody else
Mm.
reading that statistic would say, yeah, we know Black wives contribute more to household income. But I'm like, no, no, no. That's why my parents pay so much in income Because the one thing I do remember on my parents' tax returns is my mother and my father made roughly equal amounts. My mother was a nurse, my father was a plumber. He worked for the New York City Housing Authority, and he would get overtime. Depending on how much overtime he made would determine whether he made a little bit more than my mother made a little bit more than he did. So I realized, oh, my mother and my father contributed roughly 50% to household income. So they were paying a significant marriage penalty. And the research, the sociology research that I uncovered showed that most married Black couples did marriage the way my parents did, where you had co-equal earners and not a single wage earner. If you have a single wage earner where one person works in the paid labor market and the other person is stay-at-home spouse, they get a tax cut. They get the marriage bonus. So I was taught in school this thing about marriage bonus and marriage penalty, but I was never taught about the racial implications. In fact, I have an LLM in tax from NYU. I never, ever, ever in any of my tax courses had anybody talk about race whatsoever. So I was creating on a blank slate, as it were, and finding it in all these different ways that I never saw coming.
I love the way that you can kind of map those things over one another and then see, oh, this is what this is, right? And it
Right.
one of the things that it immediately makes me think is like somebody knew what they were doing, right? And like
Yes.
I'm curious if you found anything that showed like they knew what they were doing.
Okay, so you are a mind reader because I was just thinking we did not get here by accident. You have to ask
Yeah.
yourself, how did we get the joint return? Because this is the problem. So, like in Canada, people don't file married, they file individual. If we had individual filing like we did at the beginning of our income tax system, we wouldn't have marriage penalties and marriage bonuses. So, how is it that this happened? Well, there's this couple out of Seattle called the Seaborns, and he worked in the paid labor market and he had investment income, and she was a stay-at-home spouse. And at the beginning of our income tax system, the only people who paid taxes were rich Americans, and no surprise, rich white Americans. Well, the
Mhm.
Seaborns were a rich white couple, and he decided he didn't want to pay taxes or his fair share of taxes. So, what he and his tax lawyers did was decide to split half of his income and just treat it like his wife got it. She filed a return, he filed a return, and I will tell you they were fraudulent returns because they didn't have authority to file those returns under our tax system. So the IRS challenges, they go to court and they go all the way up to the Supreme Court. They say, oh, yeah, you can do that. You can do that because you live in a community property state. And she is legally entitled to half of everything anyway. So, yeah, therefore, his income that would have been taxed at this high progressive tax rate is now taxed at a much lower rate because he's able to split half of it with his wife. So combined, they pay lower taxes. Well, that's great for rich white people in community property states. But you know who it's not great for? Rich white people in separate property states, because they don't have the benefit of that. They're paying higher taxes. They're seeing people across the country paying lower taxes for the same income, and they have two options. They can lobby Congress, or they can change their state property laws so that they convert from separate property to community property. Well, there's a catch. If you create community property from separate property, it means the stay-at-home spouse has a legal right to half of everything. And a lot of men didn't like that. So they went to Congress and got a joint return in 1948, which treated married couples as if they split half their income with their spouse. But the spouse had no legal economic rights. So the joint return short circuited what community property could have done across the country. So, yeah, we have Congress intentionally choosing to give a marriage bonus to couples. And at the time, it was no surprise, we would see more Black married couples, not stay at home spouses. But at that point, nobody was paying taxes other than the really rich. Fast forward to 1969, when you have the marriage penalty coming into full force, and just about everybody else is paying taxes at that point. So history shows us that there was an intentional tax break given to rich white men, and it's called the joint return.
I first of all, the way you frame that at the end, and it's called the joint return, like giving this to rich white man was the point. Like I, my mind is bursting. I'm like, there's so much there, right? I think that there's something so insidious about the way that these things get written and messaged, right? As a person who's
Yes.
been working in media for 20 plus years, I've really been analyzing a lot of the ways in which the United States, through our White House, through our through our various different kinds of policies, through the ways that we message to the world, through the signs that we put up, through the things that we
Right.
celebrate, the ways that we reinforce certain ideas, but then like you start to investigate what those ideas are or where they came from or what they were actually for or the outcome of those things, whether intended or not. And it's like, oh, the racism is like baked into this, into that. And as we were saying, like looking at the definition here of penalties versus bonuses, it's like the
Bonuses.
patriarchy is built into it and all of these different things.
And I
I'm
will tell
fascinated.
you,
Oh,
oh,
go.
I
Yeah.
was just going to say it, and you're talking about media messaging, but I will tell you, I had to fight the legal academy. Tax law professors did not want to hear anything I had to say about race. They told me I didn't know what I was talking about. Tax law had nothing to do with race. I was the one that didn't know what I was talking about. It was, and the reason why I wrote The Whiteness of Wealth was for a trade press. It was for a book that the public could access because academics told me I didn't know what I was talking about.
And so,
Because,
okay. Oh,
okay,
go.
because, you know, tax law, it's changing, but at the time it was very white, it was very male. They know economics, they know math. I can't possibly know what I'm talking about. And I found that no matter what I taught, no matter what proof I gave, it there was always an answer. Well, it's not race, it's class. Well, then I would give you the race and class analysis. Well, it's not that, it's wealth. Well, what's more race and class than wealth? But
Mm.
it was amazing how colorblind the tax law professoriate was. And some of those people have had to change what they think after the success of the book because it's really hard to ignore race and tax once you've read The Whiteness of Wealth.
I appreciate this because you are kind of reading my mind now because I was thinking about the ways that resistance to this work must have shown up, right? And I
Yes.
know that you had to have been fighting this at every level because I know just by the very specificity of what you're doing, you have got to be the only or one of very few in most of the places that you go. Am I
Yes.
right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
And to add to that, I have the nerve to talk about race in an area of tax that most people like myself go into thinking it has nothing to do with race. So I wasn't mad that I was getting this opposition. I was one of the people who opposed it initially, right? But
Yeah.
when I show you the data, when I show you at all income levels, married black couples have a higher percentage in marriage penalty households and marriage bonus households, you want to dismiss it because, well, it can't be that, or it can't be that. Or as what one person said to me, Dorothy, everybody knows your work is irrelevant because blacks are poor and don't pay a lot in taxes. Well, first of all, most black Americans are not poor. If you look at the definition of poverty, we're not. But even if we were, the one thing we know about poor people is they pay a lot in taxes. So it's just
Mm.
nonsensical to say poor people don't pay a lot in taxes. Even if we get beyond the fact that like 80% of black Americans are not living in poverty, even if we get beyond that, poor people pay a lot of taxes. So,
Yeah.
but that was the dismissive nature with which my work was treated at law professor conferences in rooms full of people. They had no problems being insulting And my South Bronx would always come out. So I was fine. I knew how to take care of myself. I'm like, I said to this one guy, well, if you're right, what we really want is our kids to grow up to be poor so they don't pay a lot in taxes. And the room fills out laughing. And, this guy never spoke to me again. And I thought my work here is done.
That's
Okay.
so good. That's so good. I love that. Okay. So there's two different things that I want to touch on here before we wind down, because I don't want to take all of your time. So one, I know that the resistance to this had to have been strong, and you already point to that. I'm curious the ways that showed up as challenge, because I've heard you say that resistance also really helped you to be able to make your argument better. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, because when I first started this, I was just talking about race, and I would always get, but isn't this class? And it made me talk about race and class, which simply strengthened the race point. Because whether I was talking about home ownership, or whether I was talking about marriage or jobs or how we pay for college, the tax burden faced by Black Americans, paid by Black Americans, hit all Black Americans, high income Black Americans, middle income Black Americans, low income Black Americans. And if I hadn't gotten the pushback on class that I did, I might not have dug into the various class angles, and digging into them just made the race point stronger. So, I appreciated the pushback. I didn't appreciate the dismissiveness, but I appreciated the pushback.
Well, I'm grateful for that, because I think I can relate to that in many different kinds of ways, where over the years, I have a book out called Historically Black Phrases, from one of your little friends who are going to be there, which is some analysis and breakdown of like a dictionary of Black language, but also like kind of talking about the ways our language is influenced and how it goes out and influences the world. And like I pitched this book for years, and like I kept getting like, oh, this is interesting, but no. Oh, love this idea. No. Oh, yeah. No. Right. And like there was always a reason that it was a no. And I was kind of curious like why that was. But like the resistance, there was an intrigue, and there was something in me that was like, I think there's something here that I want to keep pushing on. And like having to wait 5 years to sell it ended up making it such a better project, right? It made me ask better questions. It made me find better partners. It made me have to like really expand all of the different ideas that I had around it. And so when I think about this kind of research and the way that it was speaking to you, I imagine that the resistance was probably frustrating and also hurtful, maybe, or degrading, or just all of those different kinds of things, and also useful for you.
Oh, absolutely. And, my motto is living well is the best revenge. So, selling this book, getting a trade publication, getting the success that it had. I wound up on The View, which was one of my highlights. It was hard to ignore. And it wound up getting me appointed under the Biden administration to the Treasury Advisory Committee for Racial Equity. And that's interesting, because I found a different level of pushback from the Treasury. So Treasury set up this racial equity committee, and I came to realize they really weren't that interested in racial equity. They were interested in checking a box. So even people who purport to be supportive really aren't. They just like co-opting the work that you're doing and saying that they're committed. So that was an interesting experience as well.
I think, see, I'm gonna try to not spend another hour talking about what you just said right there, because there's a lot in there. I, yeah, there's a lot there. So I guess the last thing that I want to talk about here is that you have said that you think the Trump administration is going to help us get reparations. And
Yes.
as soon as you said it, I knew exactly what you meant. But I think that a lot of people will hear that and be like, bro, what are you talking about? Right, exactly, right. But I would love for you to kind of help people understand why you see this opportunity in this administration.
The Trump administration is so in your face with its anti-Blackness that people who normally sit on the sidelines are having a hard time ignoring it. And as a result, once you dial in, you can't unsee what you see. So, for example, you're now hearing the Trump administration and President Trump say, we want a payout to people who assaulted police officers on January 6th. Well, then you can't tell me we can't get reparations for Black Americans, right? We have a Secretary of Defense who is saying, who is doing, making sure that white women and people of color don't have offices in our armed services, that they are deliberately demoting, not promoting Black Americans. You have statements like only competent white men, and we see a bunch of incompetent white men. So you have an administration that is saying the quiet part out loud. We have the Supreme Court that under the Roberts Court, which is in the pocket of Trump. If you recall, at I think Trump's this second election, his State of the Union, as he's walking down or walking out, he shakes Chief Justice Roberts' hands and says, "I want to thank you. Thank you for helping me out," or words to that effect. So I don't care what Justice Roberts says, he's in his pocket. But Justice Roberts had his own desire to nullify the Voting Rights Act from when he was a lawyer back in the 80s. So we have a lot of white Americans who are determined to take away Black rights. And the argument that I make in getting to reparations is the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments did not end what chattel slavery turned into. It turned into Jim Crow, separate but unequal. It turned into sundown towns. It turned into government taking Black wealth by eminent domain. It turned into lynchings that were legally upheld. It turned into all of these bad things that a lot of white Americans like to think it's in the past. And you cannot look at what Trump is doing today and think it's in the past. No, it's today, it's yesterday, and it'll be tomorrow. So my argument is what it's going to take for Black Americans to get reparations is for white allies and white Americans in the middle to get in the fight and to realize that we don't have an equal society. We don't have equal opportunity. When the government targets Black Americans because of their race, there is no such thing as equal opportunity. And most people believe in equal opportunity. So my book shows how 100 years after the 13th, the 14th, the 15th Amendments were passed, we don't have equal opportunity. And today we don't have equal opportunity for Black Americans because of what the Trump administration is doing. So that's why I think the Trump administration is going to help snap people out of their, oh, we're fine. Therefore, I don't need to do anything. The only people who aren't doing well are people who can't pull themselves up by their bootstraps. They're just lazy. They're walking down the street and they got picked up by ICE that didn't listen, that didn't read their driver's license that showed they're a U.S. citizen, or look at their passport. No. That's what it's like to be Black in America in 2026.
Yeah. And I'm always thinking about how it should never be lost on us that the Trump administration directly followed the Obama administration.
Yes.
Right? When there was all this narrative about being post-racial and all this stuff that white people were throwing around, that Black people were like, what are you talking about? Right.
But it was still going on. It was still doing the first Trump administration, right? Then we had George Floyd. Well, we had Charlottesville, then we had George Floyd, and it's like, oh, well, now I see it. I'm not going to listen to Black people because they don't know what they're talking about. They're biased, etc. But I'm going to see with my own eyes, oh, they really did murder George Floyd in the street. Oh. And the only reason I think people saw it was because of COVID and they were home. If they were working, they would have been able to ignore it. But this was everywhere. You couldn't not see it. So, it's sad that it's taken a monster like Trump to help some people wake up, but you're seeing people wake up.
Well, and I think your point really makes me think about having some gratitude around there being multiple generations who will have experienced the snap of one and the other, right? Who will have seen the progress that we have been able to make and then
Right.
the way it very quickly changed, right?
Right.
And being able to see like I might, and like even thinking about white people, or even wealthy white people, rich white people, like I might have been cool. I lived okay. I saw that some people were getting some other things, but like it didn't really harm me, right? And even poor white people who can see
Hmm.
like, oh, I can see the difference between what is happening here, and that doesn't feel right, but this also has negative impact on me as well, right? I
Right.
think we can see that with rich people, with rich black people and poor black people, and even to your point, I think when we were talking about the marriage penalty and marriage bonus, like you make the point that black people at every economic class are essentially getting hit the same kind
Right.
of way, which shows you that it's race and
That's
not
right.
just the way that it's class.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And part of the way that rich Black Americans are getting hit, it's more than just the marriage penalty. It's the best tax break you can get is an investment in the stock market because the income from the sale of stock is taxed so much lower than the income from wages. But Black Americans are not as heavily invested in the stock market, even rich Black Americans. So one of the I looked at the Obama tax returns and I saw that yes, they paid a marriage penalty before they made it to the White House and Michelle wasn't working, but their taxes while he was in the White House were so much higher than their white peers because President Obama didn't get income from stock the way his white peers did. So, how we collect income and how that by race and how that income is taxed differently. Income that's more likely to be received by white Americans taxed at a lower rate, income more likely to be received by Black Americans taxed at a higher rate. It's just everywhere.
So I'm glad you went here because I had notes here and I didn't know that if I was going to be able to get to this. But you talk also about the ways we tax capital versus labor and
Yes,
how we see that show up in even in our billionaires conversations right now, right? How
yes.
billionaires are able to make so much money. And can you unpack this a little more? You touched on it there, but I would love for you to string that apart a little bit more.
Yes, so billionaires, you you most of us work for a living, we get a W-2. That money is taxed at 37% max. Okay, not everybody's paying the max tax, but up to 37%. If you have income from stock, the most you're paying tax at is 20%. So what would you rather pay tax at 20% or 37%? We'd all rather pay tax at 20%, but we don't get the choice. If you work for your money, you get taxed at up to 30%. If you're 37%, if your money works for you, you get taxed at up to 20%. But billionaires do something worse. They don't necessarily get a salary or they get a low salary, so they're not paying anywhere near the 37%. And they take their stock and they pledge it to the bank and they take out a loan. And loan proceeds are not taxable income because you have an obligation to pay that back. So they take their stock and instead of selling it, they pledge it to the bank and they say, give me $1 million loan and I'll pledge you 1.5 million of stock, whatever the bank asked them for. That $1 million loan proceeds is what they live off of. But that loan is not income because they're going to pay it back. So billionaires have the ability to pledge their property, their stock, and not sell it to have to live on. Because if they sold it, they pay taxes, but at no more than 20%. But they're too cheap to do that. So what they do is they pledge it to the bank and then they take out a loan and they don't have to pay any taxes on it.
So I'm kind of curious how you think about the okay, there are people that use the language of billionaires should not exist, and I'm shifting that language a little bit for myself to say like we should not have a system that supports the existence of billionaires, right? Or the ways that billionaires create their wealth, right? Because I think people here we should not billionaires should not exist, and I think that says to people in some people's minds like we should eliminate them all, right? We should kill them or like eat the rich or something like that. But I think what we really want people to understand is that we're saying like we should not have a system that is tilted in such a way that you can really collect over here and really be scarce over here, right? How do you see that? How do you discuss that, especially through the lens at which you come to this tax conversation and the ways that we look at our money?
So the book I'm writing now is about billionaires.
Uh
And
oh,
my
uh oh, uh
uh-oh,
oh, hold on, exclusive.
the book I'm writing now is about billionaires. And my takeaway is there are no good billionaires. Okay, there are no good billionaires. Period. Full stop.
Okay, okay. Producer Danielle is in the background throwing her hands up. I'm gonna throw her on stage so you can see her. She's she.
Okay, there are no good billionaires. Okay.
Well, okay. So one of the conversations we've been having on this show is like I grew up with Oprah and Magic and the black billionaires that we see today, right? Jay-Z and Beyonce, and like there is a thing that says I am so proud and excited and feel connected to these people's wins, right? And
Yeah.
so it's hard for me to be like Oprah shouldn't be no billionaire because but it feels different, and we've been trying to discuss that in different ways on this show. Talk more about how
Yeah.
you see that.
Because I don't say Oprah shouldn't be a billionaire. I say there are no good billionaires. Okay, so and here's my bottom line. Out of the top 400 American billionaires, 1% are black. So this black exceptionalism will not save us. You don't see, nor am I, you don't see black billionaires advocating for policies to upend the status quo. And I'm not saying they should. Billionaires are going to billionaire, which is why I say there are no good billionaires. The only good billionaire that doesn't exist would be one who would use their billions to completely upend the status quo. And ain't nobody doing that. So they are a beneficiary of the system of building wealth that we have now that is about building white wealth. So from my perspective, it's about understanding the role that white supremacy plays in our billionaire class. And if you want to fix it, you have to dismantle white supremacy, period, full stop. Whether we're talking about tech billionaires who, nobody had a problem with tech billionaires who were using facial recognition to put innocent black people behind bars. Now,
Mm.
suddenly, when white people's privacy is being upended, they got a problem with tech billionaires. They didn't have a problem when it was just us, but it is never just us. It starts with us and then it moves to y'all. So you could think it's just going to be contained in this black force field, but it never is. It never is.
Well, and even as you say that, earlier we were talking about what it's like being the first, the only, or one of the few. And like being that 1% in that group, you're very
Oh,
aware of who you are in this group, where you fit, right? And I know when I've been in spaces that are predominantly white, oftentimes, not all the time, oftentimes the black folks will find each other, right?
absolutely. Absolutely.
And we recognize how this room sees us distinctly different. And so when I think about Jay-Z and Beyonce and Oprah being in a room full of billionaires, what that dynamic must feel like, how it must feel different. And I also don't know how often that happens, but I am thinking about what you're saying through that lens as well.
And I also think that because there are like 4 out of 400 black billionaires, white Americans think, oh, it's fair.
Mm.
Okay, it's fair. Y'all ought to be billionaires. You're just too lazy waiting for government checks. When no, if you look at the typical white billionaire, like was born into it. And I don't mean they inherited it. I mean, for example, Bill Gates was born to Papa Gates, who fought in World War II, used the GI Bill to buy a home with a racially restrictive covenant, send his kid to public school, where the librarian said, oh, your love of books is a great thing, stick with it. So Bill Gates, he even said, one of his good fortune was to be born wealthy. White Americans are born into the situation where it's easy for them to get wealth. But if you look at Oprah's rise, she's scratching and clawing, and she's not making her money from income from stock the way Microsoft billionaires did. She's making it from working and paying the maximum tax rate. So her billionaire status is more significant than the typical white billionaire status. I don't know her tax rate, but I tell you, her tax rate is higher than if she's in a room full of white billionaires, I'm telling you, her tax rate is going to be higher than all of theirs. And that's why they're no good billionaires.
Wow.
So I'm with your producer.
No, listen, we've been like very excited to figure out how to have this conversation. And one of the things this season has been challenging is like, we want to do a show on this and we want to do a show on this and we want to do a show on that. And like, as we've been kind of getting through this season, it's like, no, it's going to be more. So these are themes that we're discussing throughout the season. Right. And like, I heard you mention the billionaires and I was like, oh, snap. Yes. Come on, come talk to me about that. So I'm super grateful that you have this perspective. I guess last thing I'm curious about is like, where are the bright spots that you're finding right now that are like, oh, this is something to pay a little bit more attention to? We already talked about the way that the Trump administration is kind of going to, my dad might say, bust hell wide open. And I think that tear all these things apart, that can be really useful. But what are some of the other bright spots that you're seeing where we can see some possibility for us right now?
Well, I look at Mayor Mamdani in New York. I'm from New York, right? So, and the work that he's getting done, I'm looking at how the Democrats have been overperforming in these elections. I'm looking at how Republican legislators are acting a fool and taking away voting rights from Black Americans and how that has galvanized people. I'm seeing successes that many are ignoring, right? So right now, and like I said, I'm really glad I'm out of DC because people in DC argue about the silliest things, right? So we want to argue about the 2024 election as opposed to there are midterms coming up, and shouldn't we be talking about that? And there are a lot of Democrats that want only Republicans to deal with identity politics. There are a lot of white Democrats who are telling Black people, we don't want to deal with you right now. We just want you to vote for who we want you to vote for. Whereas the Black Americans are the base of the Democratic Party. You're going to tell us, like, you're going to ignore us, right? So I think right now, this fight in the country is going on inside the Democratic Party. And the folks who didn't want Kamala to run are now using her loss to say we don't want to play identity politics, when the reality is we are in the middle of identity politics being played in our faces. And you won't fight for us, so I don't trust you. So I don't think a lot of the elite Dems, elite white Dems, are hearing what folks on the ground are saying and thinking, and I think they're going to be in for a rude awakening. And I'm optimistic about that because we haven't had this fight. We need this fight. We haven't had this fight. We need this fight.
Yeah. So then we always want to give folks something that they can think about for what to do now or next. Because I think so many of us are, and I include myself in this, like, this is some bullshit, or y'all shouldn't do that, or that's illegal, or that's racist, or that's. And I think a lot of us are like, we can see this thing is wrong, but we don't know what we're even supposed to be doing about it because voting feels very far away and very, very less and less useful in a time when we're gerrymandering things to death, right? Mm-hmm. I'm curious, like, what are the things that you would be suggesting to students or to people who are reading your book? Like, what are the things that they can be doing now and next?
So pay attention to state and local elections. So federal elections are important, but there are school board elections. There are, who's running for district attorney. what's their record? Are they putting people behind bars for no reason, right? So I would say state and local elections, think about running for office. You'd be surprised at the low barriers to entry there are for running for a school board, for example, or town council or city council. So you got to be in it to win it. And I think you have to figure out how you plug yourself in. Is there an elected official whose policies and platforms you support? Well, volunteer to help canvass, volunteer to help get out the vote. Who's doing that? Who in your community is inspiring you? Go show up when they have a rally. So I would say, get involved as well as self-care. It's really important to realize you can't fix everything because you didn't break anything, right? So you have to take care of you.
I'm very much with you there. Especially we started off asking like, how are you taking care of yourself? And I think that in this moment when things are changing so quickly and things are scary some days, they're discombobulating other days, and sometimes on the same days.
Right.
Um, I think that taking care of ourselves is a resistant act,
Yes, it
right?
is. Finding the joy is a resistant act. And it seems to annoy so many people when they see Black joy. So I'm like, let's show them some more.
Yeah, yeah. Dr. Dorothy A. Brown. It took us a while to get here, to get together, but I'm so grateful that it did because we got to talk about so many of the things that are happening right now that are unique and special. So thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful for you.
Thanks, Jarrett. I really appreciate your patience, and I'm delighted that we were able to make this happen.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. We Okay, there was so much that we got into with Dr. Dorothy A. Brown. I'm really, really curious how that resonated with you all. I would love to see in the comments exactly what that did for y'all, what came up for you, what questions you might have had, because I'm not kidding when I say I could have talked to her for hours more about the various different rabbit holes she kind of sent me down in my mind. And I would imagine that some of you out there had that same experience. So please let us know in the comments while you're doing the liking and the subscribing or whatever you're supposed to do according to the graphic on the screen. But now we got to shift gears over to Derrick Palmer. Derrick Palmer, as I told you earlier, is one of the heads of the Amazon labor union. And this interview is brief, but that might be because the man was not trying to let him speak or something. Derrick Palmer, welcome to the Jarrett Hill Show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Before I get started on anything else, I've been paying attention to your interviews and reading up on the work that you're doing. And the first thing I really want to get a sense of is how are you taking care of yourself in the midst of all that y'all have been doing?
I'm very active in the gym. So that's important, working out 4 times a week, and also, um, taking my time at work, not letting them overwork me, even though I'm at a job that does overwork you, and really just, eating and just, living my everyday life. A lot of organizers kind of, they let the organizing, get to them mentally. So I just try to stay focused and just be as normal as possible.
I think the piece that you're talking about how we the activism work can get to you is really why I asked this, because I feel like there's got to be a lot of opposition coming up against you that comes from the inside and comes from the company and various different things. And as I'm watching, I'm like, I really hope that you're able to maintain yourself in the midst of the work that you're doing. So I really appreciate you answering that. I'm really kind of curious, where did like resistance and organizing work begin for you? And I don't know if that really starts at Amazon. Maybe it starts outside of that work at Amazon that you started. But like, where did resistance and organizing really begin for you in life?
Well, I kind of feel like, working at other warehouse jobs. I've worked at warehouse jobs where you work in 10 hours a day, 4 days a week. A lot of intense conditions. and that's prior to Amazon. And I feel like a lot of those jobs, the temporary assignments, so they feel like they can just treat you however they want to treat you. And I notice a lot of people, kind of scared to speak out against that. And I don't know, I always felt as though like, something is off, and something needs to be said. And I was kind of like, I wouldn't say super outspoken prior to Amazon, but I spoke out here and there about certain issues, and coincidentally would end up getting that temporary assignment. It would end right after that, uh, not a coincidence, right? But yeah, it really just started at Amazon, because I started in New Jersey in 2015, and immediately I noticed that the conditions were similar to other warehouse jobs, but way more intense. And I noticed that the tactics that the productivity metrics were very intense as well, and it caused a lot of people to miss their bathroom, miss their bathroom breaks, skip out on meals just so they can perform. Some of them will perform while they're on break. So it kind of has been brewing since the start of working at Amazon. And I spent 3 years at that facility in Jersey, and it was very intense. So I tried to transfer to another facility in Staten Island, New York, and I noticed it's the exact same issues, and it was like alarming to me. So now I'm starting to think like, okay, this isn't just like this isn't an issue on a local level. This is company wide. And started communicating with with other Amazon workers at other states, and they would tell me the same thing. So I felt as though that was kind of like the start, really, and the pandemic kicked it off. It turned it up
Yeah.
to.
As I've been listening to your story and kind of getting familiar with kind of the progress that y'all have made, it seems like the 2020 pandemic really is where this started for you with within the Amazon ranks, at least, with how the company was talking to y'all about people testing positive. And I'm kind of curious about the ways that you saw your people coming together, but also starting to resist the coming together as well, and how you guys navigated that.
Yeah, it really started in the pandemic, like I said, and it was just definitely scary times. You're working in New York City, and at the time, it was the epicenter of the coronavirus. There were the most cases there, and we were considered essential workers, so we were forced to go to work. Of course, we probably wouldn't have wanted to go to work, but we had no choice. So a lot of people were scared of that alone. And what really took it to another level was when another employee, the name is Barbara. She was one of our process assistants. She actually, she was sick. She was at work and she was visibly sick. Her eyes were puffy and red, and she was walking real sluggish. And of course, at the time, we didn't really know, what the coronavirus really was. We just knew it was a virus and it was deadly. So that turned it up another notch. And a lot of workers, that were working close beside her were scared, and instead of them, going to management and raising their concerns, they would come to myself. They would come to my comrade, Christian Smalls, and other organizers as well. I mean, other Amazon workers. So, that was just like, oh no, we got to do something about this. We can't allow this to happen.
Sure. So I think what I'm interested in, because part of and this sort of ties into what you were just talking about of how you all sort of began thinking about a labor union at Amazon. A lot of people are sort of becoming interested in labor unions for the first time, which is sad for many other reasons, but there's a lot of more conversation about it with people. And I think that people have no idea where to start to even sort of learn, if I wanted to start one at my job or whatever industry it is, how would I even do that? And so you've done it. What are the conversations that people should even start to have when they're sort of labor union 101, when they're just trying to figure out what they think about it, what they need to know about it, and if they wanted to sort of think about creating one, where should they start?
Yeah, that's a great question. First, you got to make sure that you have a group of workers that have the same mentality as you, the same mindset. That, no matter what, that you guys are going to stick together, throughout this whole process, because unionizing is it's a hard process. It's not easy, dealing with other people all the time. So having that core group is important. Also, I would say, studying labor law. You study your labor law so you'll know what to do and what not to do during your campaign. When you decide to start your campaign, that's very important, and it's different from each state. Each state has different labor laws. So depending on what state you're in, you got to make sure you follow those laws. Also, you want to have you want to create a name of your union. Also, if you want to go the National Labor Relations Board route, which is the route that we took, we had to get authorization cards signed from at least 30% of your company that you're trying to unionize. Oh, I see.
Wait.
Sorry, I think this something broke up.
Nope. Can you hear us okay?
No, I can't hear you right now.
We can't see you.
I mean, what do you want to do, Jarrett? Do you want to just do audio?
Sure. Let's do it. Can you hear us okay?
I don't know if we have any other choice.
Yeah, I hear you guys.
We just gonna go without the audio and we'll put your photo up. It'll be all right.
Okay.
And it'll probably pop back up at some point, I'm sure. So don't worry about it. You were saying to us that people need to organize, and we're talking about the different ways that we do that. And I think that one of the parts of it that's interesting to me is like being curious what kind of ways that people were saying no, like the ways that people were resisting from the inside. When you talk about getting 30% of your workforce, I also know that some people are pushing back and not interested. What kind of feedback were you getting, and how did you respond to that?
A lot of feedback was really just workers being scared and intimidated because you have a large company like Amazon, and they retaliate against workers who speak out, and they don't like anyone speaking out against them, whether it's publicly or inside of the warehouse. So that was definitely one of the criticisms. Like, if I decide to support the union, or if I decide to sign the authorization card, showing my interest, can I be terminated for that? And legally, any company is not supposed to retaliate against you. That's illegal to do. So once we kind of eased that tension, a lot of people were still in support. There were some people who were still scared, and they kind of just played the background. But I feel like a majority of people were supporting. It really was dependent on how far we get, because a lot of people, they decide to support when they see it going somewhere, rather than joining in the beginning and like kind of sacrificing their job, which is something I do and other organizers do. And really just getting their feedback on, what issues are taking place directly at the company that affects them. And it was kind of easy to relate to the workers because we're still working in the warehouse. That's something that a lot of unions don't really have that advantage. When you're building a campaign, they're a lot of times they're on the outside looking in. So me, myself, being a now 11-year Amazon worker, I have a lot of experience. And any issues that they were speaking on, I can relate directly to that, saying, hey, I went through that too. So that's another thing that, that helped a lot, because, we're creating a bond that they're not getting from the company. The company is treating them like a number. So when you have people that are relating directly to you and the issues that you're going through, it helps bring everyone together.
I feel like we live in a culture that tells us to stay quiet about how much money we make, about what issues we're seeing at work, about various different kinds of harassment, about all kinds of different things. And I think we all know that that is to protect the company, right? Or to make them, to help them to make more money or to pay you less and those different things. I'm curious how over the years now you're seeing the ways that that kind of culture of silence, how it works and what the value of it is at work.
Yeah, I mean, for the company's sake, the more people that are quiet, that keeps them out the limelight. And a lot of these large corporations, they don't like to be exposed at all. They don't like that. Um, but as far as as far as like as far as like the workers speaking out, though, that is something that I feel like is kind of building now. You're seeing a lot of workers that are starting to speak out, taking the social media route, exposing the company that they're working for. So, I think that's something that's going to continue to rise, and especially the fact that all these different industries are starting to unionize now. So that only means that there's going to be more people speaking out and more solidarity being built throughout the United States and throughout the world.
Yeah, I think when you were talking about people being afraid, we know that it is illegal for companies to retaliate, but I think some people might say, well, yeah, sure, they'll find another way to do it. So how do you present it to them to say that this is the way that you protect against illegal retaliation?
Well, I mean, you just reassure them that, signing that this authorization is, it's a legal document. It is your protection. And also, our presence on the floor is something else that reassures them, that makes them more comfortable as well. Whenever there's an issue with a worker that, he or she has an issue with the management, or they're getting a write-up for something that they feel is unfair, you have us as the workers, representing that worker in HR when they get, when they want to speak out against their write-up. So anytime there's an issue that's happening on the floor, they're coming to us, but we're making sure that, regardless if they're reaching out to us, that we're constantly walking the floor, talking to people, building relationships, getting their number, social media. I probably have at least 100 people on my Instagram that's from JFK specifically. So, once you start building that connection, workers are going to tell their coworkers like, hey, I had an issue and Derrick came to me and helped me. I never even really spoke to him like that, but he makes sure that I'm okay. And he's there to represent me. So once that word starts getting around, and the presence of organizers is in that building, it really just creates like a domino effect. Like the people that were kind of in the background are kind of starting to move towards the front and saying, okay, I see what the union is doing. I want to show more support, whether it's passing out some more food or passing out some literature about the union, or just finding ways to get involved in spreading that word. So I think that's what really helps us out.
Derrick, I'm curious how you think about, from a workers' rights perspective, like what does every worker deserve? And I'm asking this from the perspective of knowing that we have a lot of different kinds of folks who are watching this, who might work in a warehouse, they might work in a retail store, they might work in a restaurant, they might work in a corporate job in an office, they could work in various different places. And I'm kind of curious how you think about what workers deserve, and certainly in context of the new book that you have.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just really simple. I feel like people at work just want to be treated like with some sort of respect. That may not be everyone, but majority of people just want to feel like they're appreciated, and that's something that Amazon doesn't do. You might only see your manager if you're getting a feedback, if you're getting a write up. they may walk past you and not say hi to you. So it's like you're not even treating me, like I'm valued. And also, really just affording their house or apartment. People, there's Amazon workers who are literally homeless that are working, and it's a shame that you have a billion-dollar corporation that's making all this money, and they're not invested into the workers. They're more focused on the customer. We understand the customer, keeps the business driving, but the workers are the reason why the customers get these items on time. So, the pay should just, people should just be able to afford, to keep a roof over their head without having to get a second job. Those are the basic things. And I think also, Amazon should give pensions to workers, not just 401k. You have a pension, that's money guaranteed for the rest of your life. So, simple things like that. And, getting sick time, if you're sick, you shouldn't be, forced to go to work because you don't have enough time to cover. You should be able to use your sick time and stay at home until you're able to go back. And a lot of people were doing that, especially even during the pandemic. People were doing that, risking their health, even though they were sick or whatever they had, and coming to work. And now it's just spreading throughout the building. So those are like the basic things.
I understand that you do not have a new contract yet, but that you do have some important updates.
Yes. So, we, as people, they may not know, but we unionized Amazon April 1st of 2022. So immediately after that, the company is supposed to come to the table and negotiate a contract with the union. But what Amazon did was they appealed, and they claimed that, we forced workers to vote yes, pretty much just basing up, making lies about, the campaign, so that they can prolong the process. So they've been appealing that since April 2022, and as of April 1st of 2026, now Amazon has been issued a bargaining order from the National Labor Relations Board, and the National Labor Relations Board is the company that creates the elections so that workers can unionize their facility. So this is a legal process, and this is a step forward into getting a contract at JFK. But also Amazon did just appeal that. They appealed the bargaining order. So, this is actually their last legal appeal left. So they have, I believe, about 6 months. And then after that, that's it. They have to come to the table and negotiate. So they've been dragging this case out for 4 years. And, it's hurt because a lot of workers were, they're like, when are we going to get the contract in? This is a step forward. So I'm very happy about that.
I understand you and Chris Smalls, who really founded the union there. You guys have some new developments that are coming up, and a new thing that's going to be happening on June 1st.
Yes. So we're actually doing a joint book release, because my book, Handbook for the Revolution, came out on May 5th, and his book is When the Revolution Comes, and I believe that is coming out June 2nd. So we're going to have a Q&A. Myself, Chris, and Torre, who was on BET for a long time, and he's going to moderate that, and it's going to be in Brooklyn, New York. It's going to be real big. We want to get as many people there as possible. But for the people that aren't able to attend, there'll be a live stream so that they can all watch. So it's going to be a very powerful conversation, and we're looking forward to having people there.
Last thing I want to ask you is about your book. The book is called Handbook for the Revolution: Building a More Perfect Union for the 21st Century. And I'm curious who you think of this book as being for. Like, who are you writing to in this book?
Well, I'm writing for multiple different people, but my aim is really for like the younger generation. Um, I feel like the younger generation kind of gets criticized for, their quote unquote lack of respect for authority. But I see their ambition, and I feel as though that them going against the system, going against the grain, is kind of motivational. And I feel like that's the energy that we need in order to make some real change in the world today. So I feel like they're my direct focus, and talking to college students and young labor organizers. Um, yeah, I think those are the ones that I'm really trying to um, gravitate towards, and we relate to a lot of them. Even at Amazon, a lot of them gravitate towards us because the way that we present ourselves. But it's really for everyone, anyone that's going through a struggle in life, that wants to make any type of change. I feel like this book can be motivational for them as well. This is a David versus Goliath story, and a group of Amazon workers unionized, the second largest private employer in the United States. I mean, in the world. And I think that's motivational in itself. So everyone could be motivated by it.
Derrick Palmer, I really appreciate the work that you're doing, the way that you're impacting this country, and the way that we have conversation around workers' rights, unionization, these big corporations, and the way that they treat people. So I'm really, really grateful for you being here and sharing your time. I want to remind folks to check out the brand new book that is from Derrick Palmer. It is called Handbook for the Revolution, Building a More Perfect Union for the 21st Century. Derrick Palmer, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Thank you, Jarrett. Thank you, Danielle. I appreciate you. Thank you.
All right. I think we gave you a lot to think about, a lot to chew on, a lot to go on the social media clips, I'm sure. But I really want to know what you guys were thinking about this, because I am going to be thinking about these things a lot more. I want to talk with Derrick Palmer and Dr. Dorothy A. Brown again at some point. I'm sure that there are more things to discuss with them. So I'm curious what you guys are thinking about, and what other kinds of questions you might have about whether we're talking about taxes or reparations or about organizing and unions. I'd really love to know what was coming up for you all as you are watching this and kind of processing these conversations and questions yourselves. I appreciate you spending all this time with us. If you've made it to the end of the video, you've been here for a little while, and I'm grateful for your time and your attention. But also want to encourage your action, your engagement, your involvement. We talk on the show a lot about what people can do now and next. And that's because I think it's so important for us to be thinking about how we respond in this moment. Part of that response, as we talked about with both of our guests, is taking care of yourself, whether that is with rest and the various ways that we think about self-care that are actually self-care and not just calling it that, but also the ways that we are showing up in our communities, whether that community be local or if it's a community of identity, the ways that we are showing up for each other, the ways that we are engaging with this moment. It's important that we are taking action and getting as much information as we can handle to be able to move us forward. I appreciate you. Have a great one. We'll see you on the next episode of The Jarrett Hill Show. My thanks to Danielle DeCourcy and Jessica Bell for helping us. I'm grateful for them both. This is our live credit, by the way. This is credits. Danielle is looking at me right now and waving and laughing. But I appreciate y'all for being here. We'll see you next one. Have a Hey, what's up? I'm Jarrett, and you just finished watching a clip from The Jarrett Hill Show. The Jarrett Hill Show, me being Jarrett Hill. And I would love it if you would like, subscribe, share with your friends, talk to someone about what you saw, and we'll see you next time.